Hello, it's Moira here, and this video tutorial is going to look how we can start an envelope border. Your beautiful project is now complete, but you've all these ends to deal with. How do we deal with them? Well, creating an envelope border is one method. So what exactly is an envelope border? Well, an envelope border is a border that actually has got a back and a front, and all those ends are sandwiched in between. So as you can see here, these are the ends from this project. There's the back border, there's the front border, and in between are my ends. They're enveloped in the center of the back and the front borders. Starting an envelope border is a three-step process. Step 1, we work around the project with slip stitches. Step 2, we work the first row of the back with treble stitches, and step 3, we work the first row of the front with double crochet back loop only stitches. The different steps when we start an envelope border require different hooks. The first hook we use in step 1 is a size larger than our body. The hook that we use in step 2 is a size smaller than the one we worked with in our body, and the hook we use in step 3 is the one that we worked with in our body. I'm now ready to start step 1, my slip stitch round. So remember, I'm using a hook size one size larger than I worked with in the body section of my project, which is going to be a 5.5mm hook. Always use a colour for your slip stitch round that makes it easy for you to see your stitches when you need to pick them up in step 2 and step 3. I'm going to use a yellow for my slip stitch round. I always start at the top of my work. I'm just checking that I'm at the top here, checking my stitches, and it doesn't matter which stitch you start in. So pick a stitch and insert your hook into the back loop, and then we're going to join our slip stitch yarn with a chain stitch. I'm working slip stitches into the back loop all along this row until I get to the corner. I'm just about at the corner here. I've got 3 stitches yet to work, 3 slip stitches that I'm going to work, and then I will actually let you see how I'm going to work around the corner. So that's the last slip stitch done for my top row. I'm now ready to deal with the corner. You never work a slip stitch into that last border stitch. You're going to insert your slip stitches in front of that last border stitch where I'm pointing to. I'm going to insert all the way down there with my slip stitches. Get round the corner, we work 2 chains. That's my 2 chains worked, and I'm now ready to work down the side of my body. In order to see where I actually want to insert my hook, I'm pulling gently on my last border stitch, and by doing that it allows me to actually see the hole, which is what I'm looking for to insert my hook into. You can see I gently pull that last border stitch to the side, and I can see the hole where I need to insert my slip stitches. And I always work with my tails in front of my yarn that I'm creating my slip stitches with. You want to actually have the tails in between the front and the back stitches that you've just created. And you can see the nice neat corner that's been created by coming down with our slip stitch all the way down that edge. And our last border stitch is to the left hand side of our slip stitch, so it's at the left hand edge of our slip stitch. I'm now going to continue working my slip stitches all the way down this edge until I get to the bottom corner. The bottom corner I've reached now is the corner that actually I started. This is where I started with my foundation chain row when I started the project. So it is a little bit looser and it's a little bit of an odd corner to work. So I'm making a slip stitch in that loose stitch that's been created by my foundation row, and then I'm working 2 chains to get around the corner. I'm just tightening up that loose stitch so I can actually identify where I'm going to insert my first slip stitch in this side. That very first stitch was actually part of our last border stitch, so we don't use that, so it's the second stitch that we're going into. Now, we don't really have a back loop stitch because this is our foundation row, so it's the top loop that I'm actually going to be working into. So I'm working my slip stitches into the top loop of what was my foundation row. And that completes our second corner. I'm going to continue working my slip stitches along what is the bottom of my work until I get to the next corner. I've now reached the third corner of my slip stitch round, and again, just like when I got to that first corner, I can see that I've actually got border stitches, and these are my first border stitches, so I'm not going to work the slip stitch into the first border stitch. My last slip stitch will be the stitch before that first border stitch. Then I've got the 2 chain to work to get around the corner. And just like before, I can pull on the ends gently so that I can identify the hole where I need to insert my hook. So now I've identified where my first slip stitch is going in this side. Always make sure those ends are in front of your working yarn, and you're going to again just gently pull so you can see where those holes are, and work your slip stitches all the way down this side until you get to the next corner. I'm now down at the fourth corner, or the last corner. I have a couple of stitches still to work. I'm just tugging very gently on that corner so I can actually straighten my stitches out and see exactly where I need to insert my hook. So that last stitch before the corner, you might need to give a little bit more of a tug on. There we go. I've got 2 chain to work to go round the corner. I'm now looking to identify what stitch it is that I'm going to insert my hook in for the first slip stitch of this side. That's the first border stitch, so it's the second stitch, the drop treble stitch, which is where I'm going to start my slip stitch for this side. I'm now going to continue working slip stitches along until I join up with the very first slip stitch where I'm going to create an invisible join. So I've worked that final stitch, I'm snipping my yarn and pulling it through, and I'm now ready to create an invisible join to that very first slip stitch. To work an invisible join, you need a big-eyed or a darning needle and thread it up with the end that you've just snipped off, and I'm going to insert my needle into the V section of that first slip stitch, not the chain stitch, the slip stitch. So insert through that V of the first slip stitch, and then I'm going to insert my needle into the center of the last slip stitch. And as you can see, we've created a dummy slip stitch, so it's nice and neat. I'm not going to weave in these ends at the moment. I'm going to weave them in after I've completed the back and front rounds. Step 1, our slip stitch round is now complete. You can see we've got a nice neat slip stitch round all around our project. So we're ready now to move on to step 2. Step 2 works trebles into the back of our slip stitch, and we use a hook one size down from the one that we used in the main body of our project. We're going to be inserting our hook into this little bar at the back of our slip stitches. You can see it's like a little dash. It can be quite fiddly to get your hook into it. Sometimes you might need to pull it to one side to make it a little bigger. I sometimes use a darning needle to actually pull it. I'm using my fingers there. You can see it's a little bit fiddly, but once you get your hook in, that's us ready to start. I'm using my cream yarn again, and this is because I always work that first row of the back and the front in the same colour. On this round, it doesn't really matter where you start. you can insert your hook into any of the stitches. Now, because we're working treble stitches, double crochet stitches for my US friends, we're going to chain 3 to get to the same height as our treble. So I'm working a treble, so my yarn is wrapped around my hook, and then I'm inserting my hook and working my treble stitch as usual. Now, as we've already discovered, inserting our hook into these stitches can be a little tricky. Here we go. This is a few of the treble stitches now worked, and you can see how neat that actually looks coming up from the back. I'm nearly at the place where I actually created that invisible join on my slip stitch row, and remember, I didn't weave those ends in. What I'm going to do with one of the ends now is actually create a little dummy stitch, because there is a stitch missing that I actually need to just create one little wee bar. Using my darning needle, I'm just going to insert it and put it through that stitch and create that nice little dummy stitch. Next to our dummy stitch is a strange little vertical stitch, and this is because it's the first stitch in the slip stitch round, but don't worry, we are able to insert our hook into it. I'm continuing working my trebles along here, and now I'm ready to insert my hook into that vertical stitch. It's a little bit hard to get into, but you will manage to work your treble into it, and then work your treble into the dummy stitch. That's a lot easier because it's a slack stitch. Continue working the trebles along this side until you get to the corner. I'm just about at the corner. This is the last stitch before the corner. I'm now ready to work into my chains. The first chain from the slip stitch round, we're going to work 2 trebles into it. There we go, first treble, second treble. I'm then going to work my 2 chains to get round the corner, and the second chain stitch from the slip stitch round, I'm going to work 2 trebles into it as well. We've now worked that first corner, which was 2 trebles, 2 chains and 2 trebles. We're now ready to work down this side. If the stitches down the side are a bit too tight for you to get into, I sometimes take a darning needle and just loosen them off like I'm doing here. And this should help you actually insert your hook into these back stitches a lot easier. Continue working down this side until you get to the next corner. And when you get to the corner, you treat it like you did the last one, with 2 treble stitches into that first chain at the corner from the slip stitch round, then work 2 chain stitches and then work 2 trebles into the next corner chain. You're going to continue working your double treble crochets all the way around your project, making sure that you at each corner add 2 treble stitches, 2 chain stitches and 2 treble stitches in the corner chains. Once you get back to the beginning of your treble stitches, you're going to join those treble stitches to each other with an invisible join. So I've fastened the yarn off and I'm now ready to link to that first treble stitch with an invisible join. Make sure that it's not the chain stitches that you're linking to, but that first treble stitch. And we work our invisible join as we did in the slip stitch round using a darning needle. Identify the stitch, which in this case is our treble stitch, and go through the pointed bit of the V, and then insert your needle into the center of the last treble stitch you worked, and then weave your ends into the back of the treble stitches. The first row of the back border has now been worked. Step 2 is now complete, so we're now ready to look at step 3, which is going to be the first row of our front border. And the hook that we're going to use on the front border is the hook that we used in the main body of our project. In the front border, we're going to be working into the back loop of our slip stitch round. Again, it doesn't really matter where you start. I'm joining my colour A yarn because I'm working with the same colour as I worked with in the back border, remember? And I join with a chain stitch. And then I'm going to work a double crochet, back loop only, all the way until I get to the corner stitches. This time, when you reach the corner chains, you'll find that you've already got stitches in them, because we worked the 2 trebles from the back border into those chains. But that's not a problem, because we're going to insert our double crochet into the corner chain alongside our treble stitches. Insert your hook into the chain stitch. You can just slip it in around the back of the trebles and then work your double crochet stitch. The double crochet stitch will sit in front of the trebles that are already there. Work the 2 chain to get round the corner, and then again insert your hook into the chain stitch from the slip stitch round and work your double crochet stitch. Continue working your double crochet back loop only along this side, and a tip to be able to actually work a little bit easier with this side is to hold your edge. Can you see I'm just holding my edge and rolling it around with my fingers so that actually I'm offering up that top edge of the slip stitch, the back loop of the slip stitch, to enable my hook to get in that a little bit easier. I'm just about up to the second corner, so we'll go through how we work around the corner again, just as a recap. Insert your hook into the chain stitch, which is sharing the corner with those 2 trebles from the background. Work your double crochet, then work your 2 chains, and then insert your hook into the next chain stitch, which again has got 2 treble stitches in it from the background. And that's our corner complete. Keep on working double crochet back loop stitches all the way around the rest of your project, making sure that when you get to the corners you're going to work 1 double crochet, 2 chain stitches and 1 double crochet into those corner chains that already have the stitches in it from the background. The first round of our front border is now complete. I joined the 2 stitches to each other at the end with an invisible join. And looking at our slip stitch round here, you can see that it very nicely outlines the project just before we start that border stitches. And it's to give me this clean edge, which is why I take the time to work a slip stitch round. And we can see the back round here now. There's our treble round, which is double the height of our front double crochet round. I'm now ready to cut my ends. I deliberately haven't done so until now because I like using them in the slip stitch round, as you noticed. You can knot them together if you choose to do so. I don't, and I'm going to cut mine down to about 5 centimeters in height. With a small project like this, I can actually use masking tape to help me cut my ends. Now I've got my ends all secured, I can just use my scissors to snip up and get rid of all those pesky ends. So I've now got a nice, neat lot of short ends at one side of my project. If we defer back to the sample that I showed you way back at the beginning of the video, you can see that the length of ends that I've just cut are the same as the length of the ends inside that envelope border that I showed you at the beginning. And that is how we start an envelope border. Step 1, we work our slip stitch round all the way around our project. Step 2, we work the first row of the back border with treble stitches. And then step 3 is the first row of our front border, which we work with double crochet back loop only stitches. And then finally we can neaten up our straggly ends. If you've found this tutorial on how to start an envelope border useful, please do subscribe to Daisy Knot's YouTube channel. Thank you.